I am an antelope. There's no need for you to know my name. Where I come from, we are not remembered by names, but by traces. The direction of our footprints, the angle of our shadows in the morning, the way we chew the grass. Each is a kind of signature, but sometimes traces are not enough to be remembered. The wind erases them. The rain washes them away. That's why I need a story. Rain may wash away my tracks, but it cannot silence this voice. It was the year 1803. I was born in the eastern savannas of Africa, in the vast, undulating grasslands between Tanzania and Kenya. Just as the last shimmer of night faded and the sun had not yet fully risen, I took my first breath. The scent of earth, that complex blend, dry grass, the lingering coolness of night, the faint trace of smokeless fire from afar. With every breath, the world seemed to grow wider. When my mother's tongue wiped the dust from my body, the first thing I felt was the warmth of life. Her body beside me didn't just shield me from the wind, it protected me from all the harshness of the past. I remember her eyes. They weren't just brown. They held memory, fear, and patience. And as I looked at her, movement began beyond the place where her gaze was fixed. Our herd, we called it our tribe, was small but tightly bound. 8 females, 3 young males, 4 calves. In the vast savanna, we were like a handful of hearts, a single drop of life. Leading us was an old male, his body slightly stooped, but his gaze still razor sharp. We called him Awakefoot. Awakefoot was not just a leader, he was a living map. He knew every water trail, every thorny path, every hidden trap behind the bushes. Once, there was a morning when the hyenas circled silently. The herd calmly spiraled away without panic. No one asked why. Because Awakefoot spoke only with his eyes, and that look said, "If you want to live, now turn, slowly." My childhood was woven from escapes, but each escape was like a prayer to nature. Less out of fear, more a ritual, like the flutter of a bird's wings, like the stillness of a lion. And after each escape, nature would embrace us again, because we did not fight against her. We lived by her pulse. When spring came, the grass was cool and damp in the mornings. My mother and I would take long walks. We moved by listening to the soil beneath our feet, by smelling the changes in the air. Sometimes we'd pause to listen to the shimmering bird songs in the bushes, especially the flamingos. Their dance was strange, feet sunken in water, heads swaying like a trembling river. Yet it was as if each one moved to a rhythm only they could hear. One day, my mother nudged me with her ear and whispered, "Look, they're not just colors. They are the morning smile." And that day, I understood. Some creatures are born not only in harmony with themselves, but also with the sky. I had a brother. He had no name. We didn't call each other by names, but by scents, by glances, by silent echoes. Yet, he was everything to me. Just a year younger, but when we raced, he would surge ahead as if he were chasing the wind itself, and I would slow down on purpose, because seeing the victory smile on his face was like watching the sunrise. Always the same, always beautiful. I grew up with him. I would fall asleep to the rhythm of his breath and wake to the twitch of his nose. One morning I bit him playfully. He raised his brow and looked at me as if to say, "I may be a chewed-up blade of grass, but I didn't deserve this." He taught me how to laugh, even in the middle of a jackal's howl. Each night our mother told us stories. She'd lie quietly on the ground, her gaze fixed on nothing, and she'd say, "If one day these lands fall silent, even the wind will grieve." I used to think I understood what wind meant, but it turns out the day when the wind grieves was yet to come. That morning was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that comes from birds resting. This silence was born from something unknown. The sky was grey but cloudless. The earth was still. And then, the sound of a gun. Sudden, metallic. A scream that split the air. Smoke curled in the sky. The ground seemed to crack. From behind the bushes came strange shapes. Tents, wheeled iron ghosts, shouting men, white shadows. That's what the elders called them. The color even the sun was ashamed of. When they came, everything fell silent. The birds, the wind, even us. That morning my brother didn't return with us. No trace, no scent, no sound. The last I saw of him, he didn't look afraid. He looked confused, as if his eyes were asking, "Isn't this just a game?" Our mother sat as though wrapped in the darkness of dusk itself. She didn't speak, but a single tear fell from her eye. And that's when I understood. Sometimes nature mourns too. The earth breathes slower, the grass bows its head, and the air becomes heavier in the absence of a brother. Years passed. Time didn't scratch itself into me with claws. It carved through me like wind through canyon walls. I had become a young male. Once my horns met my mother's gaze. Now they brushed the sky. My legs moved faster. My escapes were sharper. But I spent most of my time watching the sky. Because the clouds had changed. They were no longer rosy at dawn, but pale. And dusk came earlier, grayer. As if the sky was hiding a secret. As if it were hesitating to decide. The females had begun to circle around me. Sometimes our eyes would meet. We'd chew a leaf together, then share a silent smile. But my thoughts were elsewhere. Because the birds were flying north. Too early, too fast. The rains were late. The earth was thirsty. Migration time came again. But this time, it wasn't just us. Humans were migrating too. Caravans moved through distant valleys. First came wooden boxes, carried crosswise. Then came the shiny, whistling machines. Men draped in strange colored fabrics. Some singing, some shouting. All moving in one direction. West, north, further west. The white men's temporary towns were no longer temporary. They built walls from dust, stretched barbed wires and caged water in wooden frames. The shade that once belonged to us now obeyed commands in another tongue. Then one morning, a Wakefoot didn't stir. He was always the first to rise, to scan the sky and lead the path. But that morning, his head hung low. His body didn't move. My mother lay beside him without taking a single step. She said nothing, and neither did we, because his departure was as silent and final as a migration. That day, the sky howled with wind, and that wind pushed me to the front. Leadership passed to me, but I was still in his shadow, a youth who hadn't yet left his own mark. I knew the direction, but not how to lead. And then, that night, the silence wasn't nature's anymore. It was man-made. The air was heavy. The wind was lost. When I woke from sleep, it wasn't sound I noticed first. It was light. Faint yellow lights moving across the dark. Lanterns. And on the ground, tension, like webs we couldn't see, but could feel. Nets. Humans. They made no noise, but I could hear their breath. Even the stones beneath them were afraid to betray their presence. It felt like the night itself had become the prey. And we we might not live to see the dawn. They caught us. In a single night. A whisper. A blink. It all happened. We had no time to cry out, because silence came armed. Iron whistles tore through the night. Barbed wires closed off the sky. The herd scattered, screams turned to guttural bellows. I ran. Not just with my legs. I fled with every memory inside me. But knees are never as fast as memories. Behind a rocky ledge, I saw my mother. For the last time, she saw me too. One glance. How long can that really last? But every word of a lifetime was in that look. I couldn't say, don't go. I couldn't say, don't forget me. We just looked. That was all. Then darkness. I was moved, shaken, shoved into a box. There was no sky, no wind, only wood, iron, urine, sweat. The sting of rust burned my nose. My stomach turned. The scent of nature was gone. Nature hadn't come here. Then we were loaded into a massive shadow. A ship. Like a ghost carrying the land's fury on its back. Footsteps echoed, chains clinked and clashed. Beside me stood an elephant. He could barely remain upright. Chains had carved into his legs. His eyes were hollow. He was a child of the mountains. Now, he crumbled in the tremors of this thing. In another crate, 2 ostriches huddled together, eyes closed, as if whispering that none of this was real. But every wave that slammed against the wood reminded us all, this was no dream. From deep within the cages, screams rang out. Monkeys! One kept tugging at its chain, another tore at its own fur. It was as if madness had boarded the ship before any of us. Days passed? Weeks? I couldn't tell. Time had no pulse here. Even if the sea swelled and surged, time itself stood still. When the moonlight hit the water, I sometimes mistook it for morning. But the sea's morning always lies. Because here, the darkness that follows light never ends. At last, a harbour. It wasn't silent here, but the noise meant nothing to me. A language I didn't know, a chaos without shape. I smelled iron at the docks, sea moisture mixed with rust. This was no shoreline shaped by waves, but by men, and those rising forms. They weren't trees. They were upright stones, buildings. America. I heard someone say it. New York. As for the year, I noticed a small sign, 1832. I never used to separate place from time, but now the difference was vast. Then came a voice from above. Exotic exhibit! I didn't understand the words, but I saw the crowd stir. That voice turned every eye toward me. And then another voice, deeper, proud, declared, "The pride of Africa!" I trembled, because I was just an antelope. I had asked for no pride, no name. Only the scent of my mother would have been enough. They took me to my new home, Central Park Zoological Garden. It sounded grand, but inside, it was a stone. My cage was surrounded by stone walls. In front of me, a sign, a Latin name, a country beneath it. But the sign didn't hold my sibling's name, nor my mother's, nor my herd's, not even a fragment of my story. Behind me, nothing truly, stone, stone, and more stone. As if they had erased my past so I couldn't bury it there. Ahead, only watching eyes. And those eyes, they saw an animal, not a story. That first day, I cried. Tears filled my eyes, but no sound came out. Because even crying here could be part of the display. They watched me, held machines in their hands. "Cameras," they said. Their eyes sparkled, but their gazes were empty. And that's when I knew. They weren't seeing me. They were watching a curiosity. I had been forgotten, but I was still being marveled at. Strange, isn't it? Years passed. But for one who lies on stone, time doesn't flow like water. It only deepens, only grows heavier. Each spring, something within me trembled. Back then, I could sense the season through the scent of grass. But here, grass had no scent. Time grew not on soil, but inside the stone. And the wind, once it whispered stories into my ears. Now it was like a whistle, cold, aimless, foreign. Still, I walked. Each spring, I journeyed in my mind, eyes closed, feet still. But within me, my brother, my mother, and alerter feet walked across the savannah again. We lay by a watering hole, watched the flamingos dance. Not a dream, a memory. Humans imagine. We remember. Over the years, others arrived beside my cage. Animals. The first was small, curious, a little sly. A capuchin monkey. I heard his name. Billy. They called it, and he turned. The way he looked, as if proud someone recognized his name. He had a name. I still didn't. Then came a bear. He seemed lazy, but at night he growled in his sleep. Perhaps he was searching for the trails he lost in the forest. There was also a pelican. He knocked his beak against the stones until morning. He wasn't speaking. He just wanted to be heard. With time, our cages turned into a growing gallery. But this gallery had no freedom, no beauty. We stood among mirrored sorrows. The herd I once fled with had become a system on display. Before smiling spectators, this side of the glass was not a performance. It was a weight. And yet, Billy and I laughed. His joy was real. Mine was habit. Once we stole a man's hat together. He looked surprised. The crowd burst into laughter. Billy jumped. I nodded. I laughed too. But inside me, a jackal's howl echoed. One that laughed, but was still alone. I have grown old. Now time is not measured by my steps, but by my breath. My horns feel heavy, as if they carry every memory I still remember. My legs tremble, as if they miss the distances I once ran across. Some mornings, waking up feels harder than staying asleep. The children still come, but the light in their eyes has changed. Once, they watched me like a miracle. Now, they just look at another thing. Sometimes they think I'm a statue. And maybe they're not wrong, because not moving has become a form of survival. But every morning, when I open my eyes, I still think of Africa. Not my eyes. My memory opens. Mornings where the sky shattered in color. Spring winds that blew like my mother's breath. My brother's first cry. I still hear it. Time crawls here. But memories, they rise inside me like kites. The stones of the cage have aged, but the path inside me is still warm. And every morning, I walk a little deeper into that path and a little further out of this life. They no longer even write my name, just old Antelope on some report. Yet I've carried a lifetime, and inside this stone lives a continent, a loss, a game, a laugh, a tear. Now it is autumn, in every sense. The branches are yellow, the sky is grey, and the air smells faintly of rain. But within me still glows the fractured light of that very first morning. And if one day, a child hears this story, and something inside their heart trembles, even slightly, then I am still alive. Because we antelopes live by leaving traces, and if a trace falls into the heart, it becomes eternal.